My name is Marissa Lane. I'm 35 years old. And what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family.
On the night of my 35th birthday, a cold shiver down my spine made me pause, just as I was about to raise my glass. I switched my wine with my husband's, just because of an unexplainable feeling, and that instinctive decision ended up saving my life. When I saw the confusion in his eyes quickly turn to fear, I knew something was wrong. 12 years of marriage, words of love, nights spent holding hands through hard times, suddenly felt terrifyingly fake. I never imagined that behind that single glass of wine was a secret kept hidden for more than a decade. A secret not just about betrayal, but about a kind of cruelty I never believed the man beside me was capable of. A birthday night that should have been a moment of joy turned into the beginning of the most painful journey of my life, when I was forced to face the truth, protect myself, and seek justice amid a sea of surrounding lies.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
People always imagine betrayal as something loud, doors slamming, voices raised, a dramatic reveal. But the night I almost died was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your skin like fog and creeps down your spine. It was my 35th birthday. I was alone by the window, wrapped in the same shawl my mother knitted me in college, back when love still felt like something to believe in. Rain tapped gently against the panes, and behind me, the old wall clock ticked like a metronome, steady and indifferent. But louder than either of those was a sound only I could hear, echoing from the hollow parts of my memory, the soft chime of two wine glasses clinking together. A ritual, a promise, a lie, maybe. That sound used to mean everything. I remember my 3rd birthday after we got married. Elliot had surprised me with a quiet dinner at home, wrapping his arms around me in our tiny kitchen, whispering into my neck, "I'll always choose you." I had smiled then, stupid with joy. I thought I was chosen. I thought that kind of promise meant something. Tonight, that same memory made me feel sick. The candles on the dining table burned lower as the minutes dragged on. Elliot was late. 40 minutes, then 50. I didn't call him. I didn't even check my phone. I just sat there, staring at the 2 wine glasses I'd set out, asking myself if maybe this year, finally, he wouldn't come home at all. But then the door opened. Elliot stepped inside, rain on his coat, the smell of damp earth and distant gasoline trailing behind him. He forced a smile, one I'd seen too many times lately, tight, practiced. He didn't kiss me, just said, "Happy birthday, Mar," like we were co-workers at some office party. He walked straight to the cabinet and pulled out a bottle of red wine. Our wine. A limited vintage we used to save for anniversaries and meaningful moments. He poured it without asking. The way he used to look at me when he did, with mischief, with care, was gone. Replaced by something rehearsed. He handed me one of the glasses and lifted his own. "To you," he said. Our glasses met with a light clink. That sound again, only this time it was hollow, flat. Like knocking on a wall and realizing the room behind it is empty. I raised the glass to my lips and paused. The aroma was wrong, faint but unmistakably off. Beneath the usual cherry and oak was something sterile, something sharp and chemical that didn't belong. I looked at Elliot. He was watching me, just for a second. But that second was long enough. His eyes darted to the glass in my hand and then snapped back up. It was a flicker, barely noticeable, but I noticed. Some small voice inside me, the one I'd silenced too often, whispered, "No," so I smiled. "Oh," I said, "I think I grabbed your glass by mistake." Before he could react, I switched them. He blinked. A pause. Then, as if on cue, he took a sip. I followed, but only pretended to drink. The air between us shifted. I tried to focus on his words. Something about traffic, work, a missed call. But my ears were buzzing. I nodded, pretending to listen, pretending not to see the way his hands began to tremble. Then it happened. He coughed. Not just once. Deep, from the chest. He gripped the edge of the table. His glass fell, shattering into red-streaked shards on the floor. His knees gave out. "Elliot," I was already on my feet. His body convulsed. jerking like a marionette whose strings were being cut one by one. His mouth opened, no words, just a gasp, a choking sound that felt more terrifying than any scream. My fingers fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with hands I could barely keep steady. "He collapsed," I stammered. "He's shaking. I think he's having a seizure. I don't know what's happening." The operator's voice was calm, walking me through steps I couldn't fully hear. My eyes kept flicking to the table, to the wine glasses, one still full. Mine. One shattered on the floor. His. Something clicked. A different part of my brain, colder, more detached, took over. I grabbed 2 Ziploc bags from the drawer, heart pounding. With hands that wouldn't stop shaking, I slid the intact glass into one bag, carefully gathered the largest pieces of the broken one into the other, sealed them tight, labeled them with the date. I didn't know if I was being paranoid, but I did know I'd just stared death in the face, and it had worn a familiar smile. The paramedics arrived minutes later. I watched them wheel Elliot out, his face pale, his limbs twitching weakly. I followed in my own car, gripping the bags like they were the only truth I had left. At the hospital, I sat under harsh fluorescent lights that made everyone look like paper dolls. A young doctor approached, his face unreadable. He ingested a high dose of phenobarbital, he said quietly. A barbiturate. Had you waited much longer? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Elliot was unconscious, stable for now. I drove home in silence. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened like they were trying to hold on to the last of the storm. Every red light felt too long. Every breath felt like it could fall apart. Back inside the house, the candles had burned down to puddles. The room was still. Empty. My eyes landed on the kitchen counter where the Ziploc bags sat. Quiet. Damning. I stared at them. At the place he fell. At the ghost of a sound that now haunted me. And then the question, one I hadn't dared voice until now, rose in my throat like bile. Did my husband try to kill me? Or did someone else mean to kill him? The silence didn't answer, but the clock kept ticking. I didn't sleep that night. Even with Elliot unconscious at the hospital and sedated, my body stayed wired, like every cell was bracing for a second hit. I sat on the living room couch in the dark, blanket wrapped around me, the Ziplocked wine glasses resting on the coffee table like quiet witnesses. I hadn't told anyone, not my mother, not my closest friend. I wasn't ready to speak it out loud. As long as I stayed silent, maybe it hadn't really happened. But deep down, I knew something irreversible had shifted. By morning, my hands were still trembling. The hospital called at 8:14 a.m. Elliot was stable, still unconscious, but breathing on his own. The nurse's voice was kind, professional. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the phone in my hand like it might morph into something else. A weapon, a confession, a lifeline. I drove to the hospital wearing yesterday's clothes, my hair knotted into a bun that wasn't holding. The drive was a blur, one red light, then another. My stomach clenched with every bump in the road. When I stepped into the room, the first thing I noticed was how small he looked. Elliot, my Elliot, usually so put together, so in control, now lay pale and still under 2 white sheets. Machines beeped softly beside him, tracking every breath like time itself was afraid to move too fast. I stood there, frozen. Then I saw it. His lips twitched. A groan escaped him, low and strained. His eyes opened, slow, foggy. And he blinked at me like he couldn't remember where he was. His voice cracked. What happened? I stepped closer, swallowing the stone in my throat. You collapsed, I said. At home, after we drank the wine. His brows pulled together. The wine? You had a seizure. They found phenobarbital in your system. I watched his face carefully. Do you remember anything? He looked genuinely confused. Or was he pretending? Phenobarbital? I don't even know what that is. His voice sounded hoarse, scared. Did I overdose? I swear to God, I didn't take anything. I didn't answer. I wanted to believe him. I did. But doubt has a voice of its own, slow, deliberate, and hard to silence. I drove straight to the police station after leaving the hospital. I didn't plan to. My car just turned that way, like some part of me was taking the wheel. At the front desk, I asked for someone in investigations. They introduced me to Detective Briggs. Mid-40s, military posture, salt and pepper hair. He reminded me more of an accountant than a cop. Until I looked into his eyes, he saw everything, or tried to. I handed him the Ziploc bags without a word. He raised an eyebrow. "What am I looking at?" "2 wine glasses," I said. "We drank from them last night. My husband had a seizure. Hospital found phenobarbital in his blood. He didn't react, just motioned for someone to take the bags." "And you didn't drink yours?" I shook my head. I switched the glasses at the last second. Something smelled off. He studied me for a long moment. "That's a hell of a gut feeling." I didn't answer, because he was right, it had been. A gut feeling that had saved me. The questioning lasted over an hour. Briggs asked everything. How long we'd been married, any recent fights, financial issues, infidelity, insurance. I answered as best I could, trying not to sound like a woman unraveling. And then he asked it. "Is there any chance your husband may have wanted to harm you?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I wasn't silent because I was shocked by the question. I was silent because I didn't know how to answer it. That pause, just a few seconds, shifted the air in the room. I could feel Briggs noticing it, filing it away. "I don't know," I said softly. "I really don't." That was the moment I realized something terrifying. I didn't truly know the man I had been married to for almost a decade. When I got home, I found myself standing in the hallway, unable to move for a long time. My keys dangled from my fingers. The walls looked foreign. The whole house felt like a stage set that someone had abandoned halfway through the performance. I made tea without thinking. Sat down at the kitchen table where the wine had spilled, now clean but still echoing. I could almost see the glass tumbling again, slow motion. Wine splashing across the wood like blood. The doorbell rang. It was my mother, Lydia, with a casserole in hand and worry etched into every line on her face. "I saw the ambulance last night. You didn't answer your phone." "I'm okay," I lied. She stepped inside and set the dish down without a word. Then she turned to me, eyes narrowing the way only mothers can. "Tell me what happened." I told her everything. The wine, the seizure, the police. My doubt. When I finished, she sat in silence, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Then she said, "Marissa, I love you, but sometimes the people we love most are the ones who make us blind." That sentence hit like a slap, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I had ignored so many signs. The new passwords on his laptop, the one time our joint credit card got declined, the strange perfume on his collars, the late nights he claimed were work things. 1 or 2 of those things alone could be brushed off. But together, they began to take shape. A shape I didn't want to look at. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I didn't know what was worse, the idea that Elliot had tried to poison me, or the idea that someone else had meant to poison him. And I had almost been the collateral. Either way, the truth was beginning to rise, and the wine glass that never touched my lips was the reason I was alive to find it. It's a strange thing, sitting across from someone who's trained to see through you. Detective Briggs wasn't intimidating in the way you might expect. He didn't raise his voice or pound his fist. He didn't need to. His presence alone, steady, composed, unnervingly quiet, made the walls feel like they were inching closer. The room he brought me into was bland. Eggshell walls, metal chairs, a buzzing fluorescent light overhead that made my headache pulse harder. I wasn't under arrest. I wasn't even officially a suspect. But I could feel the weight of something shifting. I wasn't just the woman who made the call anymore. I was part of a puzzle that didn't make sense. He introduced himself simply. "Detective Briggs, I'll be handling your husband's case." He opened a manila folder slowly, deliberately. His movements were careful, like he wanted me to notice how much time he had. I hated that he had all the answers written in front of him, and all I had were questions scribbled on the walls of my brain. "Marissa," he said, calm but direct. "You told the first responders you noticed something was off about the wine." I nodded. It smelled strange, not like it usually does. I had a bad feeling. You didn't drink it. No, I switched glasses with him. Why? The question hung in the air longer than it should have. Instinct, I said. Call it gut. I don't know, it felt wrong. He wrote something down. I hated how methodical he was. Like every word out of my mouth became a line on some chart I wasn't allowed to see. And before this incident, were there any problems between you and your husband? I hesitated. That's not unusual, he said before I could answer. We all argue, but I need to ask. Any signs of financial stress, infidelity, tension at home? I wanted to say no. I wanted to be the wife who could look him in the eye and defend her husband. But something inside me cracked. Yes, I whispered. He leaned forward slightly. Can you be more specific? I nodded slowly, each word peeling off like skin. He's been distant, changed his passwords, locked his phone. There were bank issues, a few overdraft notices I didn't understand, and he smelled like perfume once, something that wasn't mine. Briggs jotted it all down. I hated how easily it all poured out of me, like I'd been waiting for someone to ask. There's a life insurance policy, he said after a pause. Taken out 2 years ago, you're the insured. Elliot's the sole beneficiary. I blinked. I didn't know. He raised an eyebrow. Large amount. I still didn't know. Another pause. He watched me, then the question came, the one that rooted itself into the marrow of my bones. Do you think your husband could have intended to harm you? My mouth opened, but no sound came. I wasn't silent because I believed Elliot was guilty. I was silent because, for the first time, I wasn't sure he wasn't. Briggs held my gaze, and I knew that silence was louder than any answer. He nodded once, closed the folder, and stood. We'll be in touch. Just like that, I was dismissed. I sat in my car for over an hour afterward. Engine off, hands shaking. I wasn't crying. I couldn't cry. I felt too numb for that. It was like I'd just heard the word divorce for the first time and couldn't figure out what language it was in. How had we gotten here? How had love turned into evidence? When I finally drove to the hospital, the sun was low, a thin orange line across the Savannah skyline. The nurses let me into Elliot's room without a word. He was awake, pale, his eyes dull, like he hadn't slept in weeks. Hey, he said, voice hoarse. I managed a weak smile. Hey. He looked at me, and for a moment, he looked like my husband again. The man who used to read to me in bed. The man who once bought me a necklace shaped like a typewriter key because he said my words were gold. They told me it was poison, he said. I nodded. I don't remember anything. Not really, just the wine. Then everything went black. You're lucky I didn't drink mine, I said softly. He closed his eyes. Do they think I did it to myself? I think, I said, choosing each word carefully. They're trying to figure out if anyone did it to either of us. A long silence. Then he whispered, Do you think I did it? I couldn't lie. Not even to him. Not anymore. I don't know, I said. And that truth landed heavier than any accusation. That night, I drove to my mother's house. I didn't plan on it. My hands just took the wheel and ended up there, like I'd been pulled towards someone who might still believe in the version of me that hadn't cracked open. She opened the door in her garden gloves, dirt under her nails, wearing the same apron she'd used since I was 12. You look tired, she said simply. I sat at the kitchen table while she brewed tea. The smells were comforting. Chamomile, lemon balm, something warm I didn't have a name for. I told her everything. The wine, the hospital, Briggs, the silence. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she placed her hand over mine and said, Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who teach us how blind we've been. I looked at her. So what am I supposed to do now? Find the truth, she said, without hesitation. Even if it breaks you. Because not knowing will break you slower. Her words lodged themselves somewhere deep. That night, back in my empty house, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the hallway clock, and the louder sound in my chest, the quiet echo of a wine glass clinking. Not from joy, not from tradition, but from a warning. Sometimes the sharpest pain doesn't come from betrayal. It comes from recognition. When I saw her, Vanessa Cruz, before she even knew I existed, I wasn't flooded with rage. I was flooded with memory. There she was, stepping lightly out of her small silver car, her hair up in a loose bun, one hand clutching an iced coffee like it was summer, not Savannah in the middle of a damp October. She moved with that ease I once had, before life demanded caution, before trust became a gamble. I had followed her there, not out of impulse, not out of vengeance, out of a need to see. I'd heard her name once, whispered in Elliot's sleep months ago. Just once. Vanessa. At the time, I'd told myself it meant nothing. A client? A coworker? But deep down, I knew, and when I finally dug through our shared cloud drive, the one he assumed I never accessed, I found dinner receipts, parking records, and one photo. Her back turned, blurry, walking beside Elliot's unmistakable frame. He was always careless in the same predictable ways. I parked across from Sage Ground Cafe, the place he said he held strategy meetings. I sat there for 40 minutes before she arrived. I didn't imagine what I'd say. I didn't rehearse. But I did feel the slow unfurling of something dark. Not jealousy, not hatred. Something quieter. A kind of grief for the woman she still was. She walked in. 5 minutes later, so did I. The cafe was cozy, too curated to be real. Indie folk music playing low. Baristas too cheerful. Tables mismatched in a way designed to look charming. I spotted her near the back, alone, flipping through her phone, lips wrapped around a straw. She didn't see me approach. I stopped just beside her table. "Vanessa Cruz?" She looked up, startled. "Yes? I'm Marissa Lane." I didn't have to say more. Her entire expression crumpled. She dropped the straw. Her mouth parted, but no words came. "I'm Elliot's wife." Her eyes widened. "No, he told me you were separated." I nodded. "He says that a lot." "I'm so sorry," she whispered, already shaking her head. "I didn't know. He said it was over, that you were just roommates, that you didn't even talk anymore." I sat across from her. She didn't stop me. "I believe you," I said. That surprised her more than anything else. She looked like she wanted to vanish, like shame and panic were fighting for space behind her eyes. "We met 4 months ago," she said, voice trembling. "He started coming in when I worked weekends. He'd bring his laptop, sit for hours. We talked about books. He said he liked that I listened. I didn't interrupt. He told me I reminded him of you, but earlier, when things were good, when you still laughed at his jokes." That one stung more than it should have. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she said. "I thought I was helping him escape something that was already gone." I nodded slowly. "That's what I used to believe too. That love can rescue people. Turns out some people don't want rescue. They want adoration, unquestioned and unconditional." Her eyes glistened. She bit her lip. "He told me he was going to leave you." "He told me he was working late," I replied. "So I guess he lied to both of us." A long silence fell between us. Then I said the one thing I hadn't meant to bring up. "He was poisoned last week." Vanessa's face drained of color. "What?" "He drank from a wine glass. Phenobarbital was found in his blood. If I hadn't switched our glasses, he might be dead." She gripped the table. "You think I shook my head. "I don't think anything yet. I just needed to know who he told what world he built around you." Tears welled in her eyes now. "I never wanted this." "I believe that." "Do you hate me?" "No," I said quietly. "I pity you." She flinched. "Not because you're weak," I clarified. "Because you're where I used to be, believing love makes people better. That if you give enough, wait long enough, they'll rise to meet your heart. But some people just take." She looked down, hands in her lap. "I thought he saw me," she said. "I'm sure he did. Elliot always sees the people who believe him. The rest of us just become furniture." We sat in silence. I studied her. This girl-woman who wasn't the villain, and maybe wasn't the victim either. Just someone who walked straight into the same fire I did. Only a few years later. She wasn't wearing a ring. No sign of commitment. But she was holding 1,000 little pieces of a man who never intended to give her anything whole. "Are you going to stay with him?" she asked. I looked out the window. I'm not even sure I was ever really with him. I think I've been alone for a long time. I just didn't realize how silent it had gotten until the glass hit the floor. She wiped a tear quickly. I didn't mean to steal him. You can't steal something that was already leaving the house, I said. But you should ask yourself why he wanted to be stolen in the first place. When I stood to leave, she didn't stop me. Marissa, she said as I turned, thank you for not yelling or hitting me. I gave a small smile. I don't want to fight you. We were both lied to. The only difference is, I signed papers. You believed words. That night, I walked into our house, the one I had decorated, cleaned, preserved, and it felt like a museum. Every photo frame on the wall felt like an exhibit in a love story that had been carefully curated but no longer lived in. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table, lit a single candle, and I waited. Not for Elliot, not even for closure. I waited for the echo of the truth to settle. This wasn't about Vanessa, or the affair, or even the poison. This was about a woman who had spent years ignoring the slow death of something sacred, and finally dared to look at the corpse. It looked nothing like the man I married. There's a particular kind of silence that comes before a confession. It doesn't scream, it doesn't plead. It just sits in the air, thick, metallic, waiting to be broken. That's what I walked into when I stepped into Elliot's hospital room. The machines beeped gently beside him. The light was dimmer than usual, casting soft shadows across his face. He looked older, not just tired, but weathered, as if life had hollowed him out from the inside and left behind a version that barely remembered what it once meant to be whole. I stood at the foot of his bed for a moment, unsure if I should even stay. But then he looked at me, not with guilt, not with fear, with surrender. You came, he said, voice rough from disuse. I wasn't sure I would. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. That was the first honest thing he'd said in weeks. I pulled the chair closer and sat down. Neither of us said anything for a while. We just listened to the beeping of the monitors and the quiet shuffle of nurses outside the door. Then he exhaled and began. I didn't poison you, Marissa, he said. But I poisoned a lot of other things. I looked at him. His eyes were rimmed red, but dry. He wasn't crying. Not yet. This wasn't a man begging for forgiveness. This was a man finally laying down the weight he'd been dragging for miles. I lost my job 7 months ago, he continued. They let me go, said they were downsizing, but I knew the truth. I wasn't valuable anymore. I was a liability. I said nothing. I couldn't tell you. I was ashamed. Every morning, I left the house pretending to go to work, drove to the other side of town, found parking lots to sit in, spent hours pretending, on my phone, on my laptop, trying to convince myself I was still a man you could respect. I clenched my hands in my lap. He went on. I started using credit cards to keep us afloat, told myself it was temporary, but the bills piled up faster than I could hide them. I created a second account, moved money around, paid minimums to keep the lights on. My mind flashed back. The overdraft I chalked up to a glitch, the small discrepancies I ignored on our statements. All the signs I'd dismissed because I trusted him, or maybe because I was too tired to dig. And Vanessa? He swallowed. She wasn't planned. She was accidental, familiar. She reminded me of the way you used to look at me, back when I still believed in myself. She asked me about my writing, laughed at things I said. I hadn't felt seen like that in a long time. She didn't know you were married? He shook his head. At first, I told her eventually, but I softened it. Told her we were separated, that we were distant. We were distant, I said bitterly. You just made sure to widen the gap. His face twisted with shame. I didn't love her, he said. I didn't even know what I was doing. It felt like survival, a way to feel something other than failure. I stared at him, letting the truth sting. And the night of my birthday? What was that supposed to be? I wanted to make things right. I thought, maybe if I brought back the wine, lit a candle, it would remind us, who we used to be. I didn't know. I didn't think. He trailed off. You didn't notice anything strange about the wine? No, he said honestly. Nothing. I thought you were just being particular. I didn't think switching glasses would change my life. He paused. Or save yours. Those words hit me harder than I expected. I stood and walked to the window. The city was quiet in the distance, cloaked in night, the kind of stillness that only comes when everyone else is asleep. and you're the only one left awake, wrestling with ghosts. I remember when you proposed, I said suddenly, not turning around. We were at the lake. You dropped the ring. He laughed softly, painfully. It rolled right off the dock. I nearly dove in after it. You looked terrified. I was, he admitted. I thought I'd ruined everything. You looked up at me and said, I'm not good at this, but I love you more than I know what to do with. His voice cracked. I meant it. I know, I whispered. That's what hurts the most. When I turned back, he was wiping his eyes. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel rage. I felt still. There was a time, I said, when I would have done anything to protect you from pain. I'd have covered for you, fought for you, stood between you and the storm. But you became the storm, Elliot. And I kept standing there, hoping it would pass. He nodded, silent. I walked toward the door. Marissa, he said softly, do you still love me? I didn't answer right away. I let the question hang there, like the last leaf on a dying tree. I love the man you were, I said finally. But the man you are now, I don't recognize him. And then I left. That night, back home, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the half-empty bottle of wine still sitting on the counter from days ago. I poured it down the drain, one slow swirl at a time. Not out of anger, not to make a point. Just because it no longer meant anything. I washed the glass, dried it, placed it back in the cabinet, and then without thinking, I walked to our bedroom. My bedroom now, and pulled out the old shoebox where I kept letters, cards, notes from him. The proposal napkin. I sat on the floor and read each one. Not to feel anything, but to say goodbye. Because somewhere in those pages was a man who used to make me feel safe. And somewhere in that hospital room was the man who broke that promise. Not with poison, but with silence, avoidance, and fear. He hadn't tried to kill me, but what he confessed that night made it clear. He didn't try to save me either. And that was its own kind of death. Forgiveness is complicated. I had forgiven Elliot for many things. The lies, the silence, the broken promises. Or at least I thought I had. But even as I watched him heal in that hospital bed, there was a voice in me that wouldn't rest. A whisper that grew louder with each passing hour. It wasn't Elliot's hesitation that haunted me anymore. It was the look in his eyes when he drank from the glass. He hadn't looked guilty. He'd looked confused. It was the kind of confusion you don't fake. The kind that bubbles up when you're standing in the middle of something you don't understand and suddenly realize you're not the one in control. That one expression had stuck with me ever since. And it was that same expression that led me to reconsider everything. If Elliot didn't poison the wine, and I certainly hadn't, then someone else had. And that someone had access to our home, to his routine, to our secrets. That someone might have been Vanessa Cruz. I started where most things start when we're desperate, the past. I remembered a name from the early days of Elliot's life, Jake Harmon, his college roommate. I hadn't spoken to Jake in over a decade, but I found his number easily enough. When I called, it felt like dialing into an old version of our life. The voice that answered was the same, only older, a bit slower, but still sharp. Marissa Lane, he said with an amused tone. I'd know that name anywhere. You okay? Not really, I replied. I gave him the abbreviated version, just enough to alert him to the seriousness of the situation, but not enough to unravel it completely. When I mentioned Vanessa's name, everything shifted. The silence on the line was long enough that I almost thought the call had dropped. You said, Vanessa Cruz? Jake asked. Yes. I never thought I'd hear that name again, he muttered. Hell. What do you remember about her? Jake hesitated. She was a walking red flag. Bright, charming, intelligent. But there was something unstable underneath all that. Everyone saw it, even when we tried not to. He launched into a story. Vanessa had dated a guy named Theo, another law student. What started as sweet and intense became toxic fast. She grew possessive, jealous, showed up at his dorm unannounced, called his mother in the middle of the night when he didn't return texts. And when he tried to end it, she threatened to overdose, Jake said flatly. Campus police got involved. It got ugly. I felt a cold sweat bloom at the back of my neck. She eventually dropped out, disappeared, he continued. Elliot wasn't close to her. She creeped him out. Said she had a way of watching people like she was already planning how to keep them. Did you ever hear from her again? No. And if Elliot did, well, then he was dumber than I thought. After I hung up, I sat frozen. The pieces started rearranging themselves. Vanessa's flirtation, her convenient presence at Elliot's lowest point, the way she seemed so perfectly positioned to offer validation, right when he needed it most. What if she hadn't just shown up? What if she had been watching him for months? I went straight to Elliot's home office. It hadn't been touched since the night he collapsed. The chair was still slightly pulled out. A half-filled legal pad sat beside a coffee-stained coaster. His laptop, dusty but still charged, waited like a witness I hadn't yet questioned. The password screen glowed. I tried the usual, our anniversary, his mother's birthday, the year we got married. Nothing worked. Then I typed, Vanessa. The screen unlocked. My stomach dropped. On the desktop sat a single folder, pending. Inside, dozens of emails from Vanessa. Some short, some long, some sweet, others obsessive, but a few chilled me. I wish she'd just disappear. You and I could breathe again. I looked up your insurance policy. It's poetic, really. Don't make me feel invisible, Elliot. I don't do well with that. One email stood out, sent just 2 days before my birthday. I stopped by. Sorry I missed you. You should check the kitchen. I left something special. I dropped the laptop. Literally. It hit the floor with a thud. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. All the air seemed to drain from the room. I paced, tried to breathe, tried to deny what I knew I now had to accept. She had been in our house. She had known how to get in. She had planned this. And worse, she had counted on Elliot never figuring it out. Maybe even hoped I would. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The bitterness in the wine, Elliot's genuine shock when I switched glasses, his rapid collapse. The fear on his face wasn't guilt. It was betrayal, not of me, of himself. Because Vanessa had set the trap. And one of us, either his wife or his lover, was going to fall into it. I sat on the floor for over an hour before I could bring myself to move. Then I grabbed my phone and texted Detective Briggs. I found something. Vanessa Cruz isn't who she pretended to be. I believe she tried to kill someone, maybe both of us. I didn't expect a reply right away, but I knew, deep down, that the story was no longer about Elliot's sins. It was about a woman who loved like fire, not to warm, but to burn everything to ash. There's a sound you never forget. The knock that changes your life. Not loud, not violent, just deliberate. That's how Kaylee Marks arrived. 3 timid knocks against the wood of my front door. No wind, no thunder. Just a young woman standing on my porch like a confession-given form, clutching a manila envelope with both hands like it was all that kept her upright. I opened the door and took in the girl's pale face, the trembling shoulders, the way her eyes darted around like she was being followed. I'm sorry for coming unannounced, she said, breath catching. I don't know who else to trust. Her voice cracked on the last word. I stepped aside and let her in without asking questions. My instincts screamed that whatever she was holding inside that envelope mattered more than anything else right now. I didn't know yet that she had brought with her the match that would burn the lies to the ground. She sat at my kitchen table like she was afraid the chair would give out beneath her. I recognized her now. Kaylee Marks, the intern who worked under Vanessa at the architecture firm where Elliot briefly consulted. Quiet, bookish. Someone you'd overlook in a crowded room. That's probably why she'd been able to observe so much without anyone noticing. She held out the envelope with both hands. I made copies. I don't know if they'll be admissible in court, but you need to see them. I opened the envelope slowly, my hands calmer than I felt. Inside were printed emails, screenshots, and what looked like a transcript of an audio recording. My eyes skimmed the first few lines. If she were gone, this wouldn't be so complicated. The life insurance is more than enough. We wouldn't have to worry again. She's already weak. 1 glass and it's done. I blinked. The air left my lungs. You're sure these are real? I asked. Kaylee nodded fiercely. I took screenshots. She always used VPNs, but she's not as careful as she thinks. Some of the metadata still led back to her work computer, and there's more. She opened her bag and pulled out a flash drive. I recorded her once. I know it's risky, but she scared me. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and played the audio file. Vanessa's voice slithered out, soft and cold. If Marissa drinks it, it'll be painless. Elliot won't know. I just need her out of the picture, then we can start over. My stomach clenched. That wasn't longing, that wasn't heartbreak, that was calculation. Kaylee's voice was barely above a whisper. She said it like she was talking about rearranging furniture, like it was just another part of her plan. I believed her. Not just because of the evidence, but because of the terror etched into her face. It mirrored the chill that had settled in my own bones for weeks. She mentioned a purchase, I said. Do you know what it was? Kaylee nodded. Phenobarbital, from a dark web supplier. She used a burner email and crypto, but I work in IT part-time. I traced enough to know it wasn't a coincidence. The word felt heavy in my mouth. Poison. Vanessa Cruz had poisoned the wine that was poured in my kitchen, the wine Elliot drank. But he hadn't poured it, and neither had I. After Kaylee left, I sat in stunned silence for a long time. The house around me hummed with memories, Elliot's laughter in the hallway, the ticking clock above the sink, the ghost of a wine glass shattering on tile. Only now I could finally see the moment clearly. Elliot hadn't looked guilty that night. He'd looked confused, panicked, terrified, because he hadn't expected to drink from that glass, because he hadn't been the one being hunted. I thought of all the signs I'd missed, the perfume that wasn't mine, the emails I never saw, the way Elliot started locking his phone. I'd assumed it was the classic betrayal, an affair, a midlife spiral, and it was, but now I knew. It had also been a trap, a slow, carefully set trap meant for me. And Elliot? He'd been caught in it too. I walked into the kitchen and stared at the wine cabinet. 3 glasses remained. One had shattered that night, one untouched, one nearly fatal. I reached for the bottle, the same vintage from that cursed night, and held it up to the light. My hands shook, not with fear, but with a strange, righteous fury. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. This was about attempted murder. I dialed Detective Briggs. His voice was direct as always. Briggs. It's Marissa Lane, I said. I have something you need to see. Emails, metadata, a recording. It's about Vanessa Cruz. I believe she tried to kill me. He was silent for half a beat. Then, send me the files. I'll be at your place in 30 minutes. I sent everything Kaylee had given me. And then, for the first time in weeks, I took a deep breath. It didn't come easy. It felt jagged and foreign, but it was real. The wind outside my window rustled the trees gently. No longer threatening. This wasn't over, but now I wasn't afraid of the storm anymore. I was learning how to stand in the middle of it and not break. When Briggs arrived, I opened the door before he even knocked. I held out the flash drive, the envelope, the full truth. This, I said, is what you've been missing. And just like that, the tide began to turn. Not in silence, not in violence, but in truth, spoken, documented, undeniable. And sometimes that's all it takes. One woman, one witness, one flash drive, to tilt the scale of justice. You'd think that the hardest part of all this would be the betrayal, the lies, the near death, the unraveling of a marriage I once believed to be unshakable. But no. The hardest part was standing still. Standing in the shadow of someone who wanted me gone and pretending for one last moment that I hadn't already seen the truth behind her eyes. It was Thursday evening, and the air was soaked with that Georgia kind of damp that makes your skin feel borrowed. The rain hadn't stopped since morning. It wasn't pouring, but it fell in sheets, gentle, insistent, like a whisper you couldn't ignore. I stood in the far corner of the parking lot outside Cruz and Harmon Designs. The building was mostly dark now, just a few windows lit like tired eyes staying up too late. I could see her car from where I stood. Sleek, white, clean, too clean. I kept thinking about the voice in that audio file Kaylee had given me, the softness of it, the way Vanessa said my name like it was already gone from the world. If Marissa dies, everything becomes easier. The insurance, the guilt. We can start over clean. She didn't say it in rage. She said it like a plan, like she'd practiced it 1,000 times. At 7:08 p.m., Vanessa stepped out of the elevator and into the drizzle, not even bothering to open her umbrella. She moved like someone used to being admired, like the weather would never dare touch her unless invited. And then her eyes found mine. A flicker of surprise. Then that smooth mask settled over her face like silk. "Marissa," she said, slow and measured, like we were old friends running into each other at a bookstore. "Evening," I replied, stepping forward. My hand was in my coat pocket, curled tightly around the pepper spray, not because I planned to use it, but because it made me feel real. She tilted her head. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk." Her smile didn't waver, but something about the angle of her shoulders changed. "You should be careful showing up unannounced like this. Someone might take it the wrong way." "Someone already has," I said. "Like the police." That made her blink. Just once. "Kaylee gave me everything," I continued. "The emails, the audio recordings, even your little pharmacy trail on the dark web." Vanessa didn't speak, not immediately. Then, in a voice that was barely a breath, she talked. She told the truth. Silence. Then laughter. Not loud, not hysterical, but cold, hollow. "You switched the glasses," she said, like she'd solved a riddle. "Of course you did. That's what ruined everything." I nodded once. I felt something was off, instinct, I guess. Vanessa took a step toward me. The rain matted her hair to her forehead, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes glinted like glass in candlelight. "It wasn't supposed to go that way," she whispered. "You weren't supposed to be that smart." I swallowed hard. "You tried to kill me." "No," she said, almost offended. "I tried to fix what you broke. He was never meant for you. He was only with you out of guilt, out of habit. You were the anchor pulling him under. And poisoning me was your idea of a life raft?" It was mercy, Marissa. There was no madness in her voice. That was what chilled me the most. I stepped back just as headlights swept across us. A black cruiser turned into the lot, followed by another unmarked car. Vanessa didn't flinch. She knew who it was. Detective Briggs stepped out first. He looked at me, then at her. "Vanessa Cruz," he said, firm and clear. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and illegal procurement of controlled substances." Vanessa turned to me as the officer cuffed her wrists behind her back. "I loved him," she said, not pleading, just stating a fact. "No," I replied quietly. "You tried to possess him. You called it love because you didn't know the difference." Briggs read her rights. She didn't resist, didn't cry, but as they led her toward the cruiser, she turned one last time and hissed, "He'll never forgive you for betraying him like this." I met her gaze with something I hadn't felt in months: peace. "He already did," I said. And so did I. Later that night, I sat across from Briggs at the station. He handed me a cup of lukewarm coffee, which I held without drinking. "She left a trail a mile wide," he said, flipping through the evidence packet. Metadata in her emails, the VPN that bounced back to her office, the recording Kaylee kept on her private drive. She thought she was careful, but obsession always leaves fingerprints. I nodded slowly. My pulse had finally settled, but my mind was still somewhere in that rain-soaked parking lot. "Is she going to jail?" I asked. "Almost certainly. We'll keep you informed every step of the way, but you can rest easy tonight, Marissa. You did everything right." That night, for the first time in a long time, I drove home without checking my rearview mirror every 2 minutes. Back in my kitchen, the clock on the wall ticked softly, steadier now, less threatening. I reached into the cabinet and pulled out the wine glasses. Not the ones from that night, new ones, lighter, no history. I took a bottle from the fridge, a white blend I hadn't tried yet, and poured a glass, just one. I stepped outside to the porch. The rain had finally stopped. The garden smelled like clean earth and possibility. I closed my eyes, listening to the quiet, and then I whispered to the dark, "This glass, I pour myself." I raised it slightly, to survival, to truth, to the woman who didn't die that night, and I drank. It was crisp, and this time, it didn't taste bitter at all. It tasted like justice. You don't always recognize the moment your heart lets go. It doesn't come with music or a sunrise. Sometimes it's a pen scratching across paper. Sometimes it's the silence after. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No gallery, no audience. Just me, Elliot, and a clerk who barely looked up as she pushed the papers toward us. The final decree sat between us like a ghost we both knew by name. Elliot looked older, not just tired, aged. His eyes, once quick with charm, held something softer now. Regret maybe, or exhaustion, or both. I picked up the pen first. My hand didn't shake. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice low. "I am," I said, and signed my name. He hesitated longer, stared at the line like it was a cliff, then signed. That was it. No dramatic exit, no parting speech. Just two people unbinding a knot that had strangled them for years. As I rose, I looked at him one last time and said, "I forgive you, Elliot, but that doesn't mean we continue. Forgiveness is a release, not a reunion." He nodded, eyes glassy, and whispered, "I hope you find peace, Marissa." Peace didn't come all at once. It came slowly, in pieces, like a puzzle I didn't know how to finish. I moved back into Mama's house in the outskirts of Savannah. The air smelled like damp pine and lemon verbena. My old bedroom had been turned into a sewing room, but she cleared it out without hesitation. "You're home now," she said, kissing my forehead. "That's all that matters." The days were quiet. I took long walks under the Spanish moss, let my phone ring unanswered, sat on the porch with a cup of tea instead of a glass of wine. I stopped checking Elliot's name on my caller ID, stopped wondering where he was or who he was with, stopped letting his silence speak louder than my own thoughts. One afternoon, while we were pruning roses out back, Mama said, "You're humming again." I paused. I hadn't realized it. What was I humming? Something old, something you used to sing before you got married. I smiled. For the first time in months, it felt real. The next morning, I opened my laptop and stared at a blank page. At the top, I typed a title that felt truer than anything I'd written in years: "The Woman Who Switched the Glass." I wrote about that night, about the subtle instinct that made me switch our wine glasses. I wrote about the aftermath, the ambulance, the lies, the unraveling. I wrote about love and how it can morph into something unrecognizable when left in the dark too long. At first, it was just for me, a way to release what I'd been holding inside, but something urged me to publish it. I didn't share it on social media. I didn't send it to friends. I just uploaded it quietly onto a simple blog and closed the laptop. 2 days later, I got an email. "I read your story. I've never told anyone what my husband did, but now, maybe, I can." Then another. "You switched the glass. I stayed silent, but your story reminded me that instincts matter." By the end of the week, there were dozens. Women. Some young, some older than me. A few even signed their emails anonymously, too afraid to be known, but too desperate not to be heard. Kaylee wrote to me too. A simple white envelope in the mailbox, with no return address. Inside was a card that read, "Thank you for surviving. If you hadn't, I might not have found the courage to leave. The seeds enclosed are for healing. Plant them when you're ready." K. Wrapped in tissue were tiny paper packets labeled wildflowers. That afternoon, I dug a fresh patch of soil in the backyard. Mama helped. We planted the seeds together, both of us barefoot in the dirt like children. "These are for what comes next," she said. "No," I replied. "They're for what was almost stolen." The garden became my sanctuary. Each morning, I'd walk the rows barefoot, coffee in hand, whispering affirmations I wasn't even sure I believed yet. "You are still here. You are allowed to begin again. What they did to you does not define your worth." I stopped dreaming about Vanessa's voice. I stopped checking news reports for Elliot's name. I started sleeping again. And more than anything, I stopped apologizing for surviving, for staying, for leaving. By the end of the month, I received an invitation to speak at a women's wellness retreat in Atlanta. The email said, "Your blog has become a touchstone for women navigating emotional trauma. We would be honored if you'd share your story in person." My first instinct was to decline. Who was I to stand on a stage and tell other people how to heal? But Mama looked at me and said, "Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stand up while still scarred." So I said yes. I stood in a room with 60 women, some teary-eyed, some stone-faced, all brave in their own quiet ways. I told them about love and fear and survival. I told them about instinct and how mine saved my life. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They just stood, in silence. And then, applause. Not loud, not wild, but steady, like rain on a rooftop, like something sacred. That night, I returned to Mama's porch. The stars were out, clear and soft. I opened a fresh bottle of white wine, local, crisp, and light. I poured it slowly into a clean glass. No shared history, no poison, no fear. I lifted it toward the sky. This one, I whispered, I pour for me. And when I drank, it didn't burn. It tasted like peace, like wildflowers, like second chances. 1 year later, Savannah's air still carried that warm, slow breath of magnolia and salt. But everything else in my life had changed. The grand opening of my little shop, Second Chances, was today. Nestled between a consignment bookstore and a flower shop that smelled like honeysuckle and cinnamon. My space had once been an abandoned art supply store. Now it gleamed with soft lighting, warm woods, shelves lined with curated goods made by women who'd survived storms of their own. We didn't just sell candles and herbal teas. We sold survival. We sold quiet strength. We sold stories wrapped in amber jars and sewn into hand-dyed aprons. I stood by the front door, heart thudding like it hadn't in months. I wasn't nervous. I was alive. Mama was the first to arrive, carrying a bouquet of marigolds and a grin so wide it nearly erased the years from her face. "You made this," she whispered, brushing my cheek with a calloused thumb. "You made this from ashes." Then came Kaylee. I hadn't seen her in person since the trial, but when she stepped inside, tentative and thin-shouldered in her oversized cardigan, I felt an ache bloom in my chest. She handed me a small envelope and said, "I just came to say thank you for everything." Inside the envelope was a simple card with embossed letters. "Thank you for not dying." There were more people, strangers who had read the blog, locals who had seen the quiet transformation of the old storefront, women with haunted eyes, daughters clinging to their mothers, friends holding hands like lifelines. As the afternoon sunlight poured through the windows, I poured glasses of sparkling cider and passed them around. No wine today. Not because I was afraid, but because this celebration needed clarity, not haze. At 3 p.m., I stood near the counter and rang the old brass bell I'd found at a flea market in Charleston. The sound was rich and low, like something ceremonial. "Hi," I said, voice steady. "I'm Marissa Lane, and this shop. This isn't just a business, it's a beginning, for all of us." Soft claps filled the space. Someone wiped a tear. Someone else whispered, "That's her." After Kaylee left, I sat down in the reading corner near the back, an alcove I'd designed with warm throws, books by female authors, and a mural that read, "You are not what they did to you." I watched the sunlight make soft shapes on the floor and thought about every version of me that had once believed she wouldn't survive. The woman who clutched the phone with 911 on the screen, shaking. The woman who kissed her husband's forehead in the hospital, still uncertain if he had tried to kill her. The woman who stared into Vanessa's eyes and heard the words, "You were supposed to die." Each one of them was still inside me, but so was the woman who lived. The woman who chose clarity over chaos, peace over pleasing, truth over fantasy. I hadn't realized until today how many women carried stories they'd never tell. Stories written in silence and compromise. But in this shop, in this space, those stories didn't have to end in suffering. They could begin again. Later that evening, after I closed up and turned off the sign, I sat on the front steps of the shop with a blanket around my shoulders. The town was quiet now, except for the occasional laughter spilling out from the diner across the street. A woman walked by pushing a stroller, and she paused for a moment. "Are you Marissa?" she asked softly. I nodded. "I read your story," she said. Her voice trembled. "I left him last week, took my baby, and left." I stood up and walked toward her. "That's the bravest thing you could have done." She smiled, tears catching in the corners of her eyes. "Your words gave me permission." After she walked away, I sat back down and let the wind hit my face. The stars above Savannah blinked like tiny affirmations. I wasn't alone. None of us were. Inside my pocket was the slip of paper Kaylee had given me. I unfolded it again. This time I noticed a second line, faint, almost like an afterthought. P.S. I'm starting over too. I stepped inside the shop once more, reached into the back cabinet and pulled out a bottle I'd been saving, Pinot Noir 2023 vintage. Not the brand Elliot and I used to share. A new one I chose. I examined the label, checked the seal, uncorked it slowly, let it breathe. Then I poured a glass. Just one. I held it up to the soft lamplight and smiled. This one, I whispered. I poured myself, and it tastes like second chances. Before I turned out the lights, I lit one candle from the display. Jasmine and cedarwood. Its label read, Renewal. I carried it to the counter and let it burn for a moment, breathing in the scent. It reminded me of late summer evenings when everything was still possible. I picked up the guest book we'd left near the door. Flipping through it, I read the names and messages. To new beginnings. Thank you for giving us this space. My story matters too. I pressed my hand against the page, as if I could touch the women behind the ink. Then I grabbed my notebook, my old companion, and opened it to a fresh page. This time, I didn't write about trauma. I wrote about legacy, about what it meant to rise from betrayal not just intact, but expand it. I wrote about how the heart, though breakable, was made to regenerate, about how forgiveness was never weakness. It was the bravest cut of all. I thought of Vanessa, not with hatred, but with sorrow. She'd been consumed by obsession. But even she had once been a little girl who wanted to be chosen. I thought of Elliot. I still believed he hadn't meant to kill me, but he'd meant to keep secrets, and in the end, that broke us just the same. I folded the page, placed it in an envelope, and wrote one word on the front. Release. Then, I tucked it into the wall behind the cash register, my own tiny ritual. Some people bury the past. Me? I label it, bless it, and build something beautiful on top. That night, as I locked the door and stepped into the cool Georgia air, the candle still flickered through the front window, casting a soft gold glow onto the street. I walked home slowly, barefoot on the brick sidewalk, the wine still warm in my chest, and I knew with absolute certainty. This was not the end of my story. It was the best beginning of all. There are wounds that don't bleed, yet still keep a woman awake through endless nights for an entire year. There are betrayals that don't scream, but shatter like a wine glass in the rain. Marissa didn't fight to reclaim love. She fought to reclaim herself. And sometimes, revenge isn't about striking back, but about continuing to live, peacefully, powerfully, and without needing anyone to save you but yourself. If you've ever gone through something similar, a fall, a broken heart, or a glass of wine you should have never drunk, feel free to share your thoughts below. Not to complain, but to remind each other. We are not alone, and there are still lives worth living beyond the doors that once slammed shut in our faces.